What your money would say. Andrew and Romina. Money Talks. Are you listening? Money Talks. Are you listening? Money Talks. Are you listening? What your money would say with Andrew McNair.
We're live here on What Your Money Would Say. I'm your host, Andrew McNair. And for the next 30 minutes, every Saturday from 12:30 to 1 o'clock, we'll be taking financial chickens and making them financial swans. But what does it mean to be a financial swan? It means to sleep well at night. And that's why I named my wealth management firm SWAN-Capital. Because I believe as a retiree, you've worked your entire life to get to this point. And it's time that you sleep well at night. See, you put 3 kids through college, you saved money in your 401k plan, and you were even able to find money to give to your local charities and tithes to your church. But it's time that you sleep well at night. But unfortunately, many of my families, my clients, and myself worry and don't sleep well at night because we worry about the national debt, the federal government spending. And I'm looking forward to bringing on the Heritage Foundation, who handles the presidential debates. And so if you've ever heard of the Heritage Foundation, you see that they make all the thought-provoking questions at the presidential debate. So we're very honored to bring them on. So we're going to bring them, the experts, to talk about what is going to happen over the next few decades with government spending and the federal deficit, and also share with you what that may mean for your retirement. So before we do that, though, why should we talk about this? You know, as a financial show, why do we worry about the federal deficit and government spending? Well, it's because those big ticking clocks, the national debt clocks, they affect you and me. And as this 30-minute show goes by, the national debt will rise another $5 million as we sit here together. So what does that mean for you and your retirement? I want to talk about one investment vehicle that you may own because it will affect it probably dramatically over the next few decades. And that is your IRA, 401k, or 403b. So if you own one of those or you're contributing to one of those, you want to listen in. I don't know if anyone's ever shared with you this, but unfortunately I might be the bearer of bad news. Right now your IRA, 401k, and 403b has a tax lien on it. See, the government owns 10 to 15% of your IRA or 401k. And if taxes continue to rise, that tax lien is only going to continue to grow. So that's why it's one of the fundamental questions I ask prospective clients before we bring them on as a client. I want to know how they feel about taxes, if we have similar beliefs and methodologies. See, if you study history and you think tax rates potentially could go higher, that's a pretty safe bet because they very well could. As these promises that we've made as a country continue to rise, either if you're Democrat or Republican, these promises, these chickens will come home to roost for our country. And that tax money has to come from somewhere. So as a good saver, as a responsible saver that you are and that I am, we've put a target on our head. And Congress and Senate know where trillions of dollars sit as we speak. And that is your IRA and your 401k money. And unless you build a plan to rescue your IRA or your 401k, you're at risk of what taxes are going to do in the future. So we're just in a few minutes, we're going to bring on Romina Boccia from the Heritage Foundation. But I want to let you know that this doesn't have to be your future, your destiny of higher taxes and it affecting your retirement. No, there's a way out. And if you call SWAN-Capital at 380-9558, that's 380-9558, we'll schedule you a free 1-hour consultation to talk about what is an IRA rescue plan. How can we rescue your IRA or 401k from potential tax burdens in the future? So I want to bring on Romina Boccia, who's from the Heritage Foundation, who does a lot of research on what the trends are in government spending and our national debt. Romina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So let's jump right into it.
And we'll talk about federal spending, and then we'll jump to actually the debt and the ever-increasing debt clock as it continually ticks on while we're going to go through this whole show. Day in and day out, I'm dealing with retirees, and one of the fears they have is, when they go to sleep at night, they understand that the government's spending more than they're bringing in. And that worries not only them and their retirement, but also their legacy for their grandchildren and children. We get lost, I think, in the billions and the trillions that we see in these national debt clocks. But what does those billions and trillions translate to just me and you?
One thing that it means is that the U.S. government now has a debt that is bigger than what the entire U.S. economy produces in a year. So not that this would happen, but if the U.S. government had to pay off all of its debt next year, everything the economy produces would have to go towards that. And when your debt exceeds the size of your economy and it's growing faster than your economy is, that is unsustainable, and you're in deep trouble because it means that the debt burden just gets bigger and it becomes unaffordable. And the risk there is that those investors who are buying U.S. treasuries, who are providing the financing for government deficits, they might become concerned that the U.S. government will not be able to honor its debts in the future because they have grown too big.
And that's why we saw that downgrade.
That's why we saw that downgrade, in part because if the government made a commitment to reduce its future unfunded obligations, and they are massive. Medicare and Social Security alone have $49 trillion. That is huge, huge. It's about $150,000 for every American, including children, older people, those in the workforce. Every single American, the unfunded obligations in Social Security and in Medicare are $150,000 for every American. So,
wow,
huge numbers, and it just illustrates the kinds of policy changes that are necessary to reverse course and make sure that the government debt is sustainable in the long run, and we don't end up having a fiscal crisis like Greece had.
Absolutely. And I believe sometimes we believe that we're too big to fail, just like some of the U.S. companies that we bailed out, in 2007, 2008. We feel like we're too big. Because I commonly hear the people quip say, well, there's nothing to worry about. There's no reason to get really frustrated about the federal debt because, hey, who's going to call it for us? And I say, well, guys, it really is not going to be that drastic. I don't believe it could become to a Greece where it comes, to a halt for government spending. But the more of the issue is those simple little effects that's going to happen over time with, us being downgraded and, other countries want to not use the dollar as a U.S. currency, which would just drastically affect our economy. So those small effects add up, and it's like we die from 1,000 cuts. And so that's what I think we have to be worried about. Let's talk about where is the money actually going, Romina?
So most of the money, about two-thirds, are considered transfer payments. It's money that the government redistributes and that pays for certain entitlement benefits. But it also takes from the lower-income workers and redistributes upwards towards millionaires. So it's not just the Robin Hood effect, taking from the rich, giving to the poor, but there's a lot of redistribution between different groups of people, and some programs like Social Security and Medicare, because they are universal entitlement programs, everybody receives their benefits regardless of their income. Higher income people tend to live longer lives, so they actually tend to receive more benefits from these programs than lower income people who tend not to live as long. So it all adds up to actually a redistribution from lower income workers to higher income individuals who live longer and are able to collect Social Security and Medicare for longer.
Is that why we're seeing a bigger spread between the haves and the have-nots? Is that why? Is it because of this redistribution of wealth from the middle class to the lower classes and the upper classes? Is that maybe why we're seeing that?
So there is some of that happening, but another factor too is, and I think this is a bigger factor, lower and middle income people, they see about 12% of their income taxed away to pay for their Social Security later in life, but they don't receive the kinds of returns they could receive if they had private retirement accounts that they controlled and that they were able to invest in the market. Where higher income people they are better able to set aside more money and put it in the market, and then they receive capital gains, and those returns are higher than the returns to labor over time. And so that's where most of the differential comes from, is capital earns higher returns than labor does. And with lower income and middle income people seeing so much of their money go to government, they are less able to set aside money and put that in the market and receive those capital gains.
Gotcha. What a great point. Now, if we were looking at maybe a pie chart to get a visual of where the money is going, is it going to entitlements? Is it going to government spending? How does that pie graph look, and how is it changing?
So about half of the federal budget, so half of the pie or half of your pizza goes to Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. So your health care and retirement programs consume half of the budget. That is going up to 2/3 of the budget over the next 10 years. So that share is quickly growing. What's shrinking is defense spending. Defense spending is falling. It's being cut. Other discretionary spending, transportation, infrastructure, education, some of that is good if it's falling on the federal level, because more of that should be done on a state and local level or in the private sector. Net interest, however, is going up. So about 6% of the budget now goes to paying interest on the debt, but that is projected to go up to 10% by the end of the decade. And keep in mind, the more money that goes to paying interest, the less money is available for other priorities, and that's money that we're paying for spending that we did in the past that we can't buy anything with today. So interest spending is really dangerous, because we are paying for past spending and not getting any benefits for it today.
And just so we avoid being lost in the translation, what I like to do is sometimes boil down these billions, trillions of dollars and make it so it's like on a one-on-one basis. If I was sitting with a client and they make $3,000 on a fixed income every month, and they're going to go from $150 to interests, like interest on their credit cards, and then they're going up to $300 a month on interest on their credit cards, that becomes unsustainable, because now you're paying so much to interest that you can't rebuy anything else. And that's very scary, because that's what the government's doing. Is that correct?
That's it. More of your money goes to paying your credit cards, or, if the interest on your mortgage went up, you may, if you didn't budget for it, it could be difficult to pay. And we end up borrowing money to pay interest on the debt. And that makes the interest go up even more, because the debt goes up too. So that's a really unsustainable scenario. And the Congressional Budget Office, which is the main agency that informs Congress on where the budget is heading and gives them warnings so that they change course, they said very clearly this debt is unsustainable. It's growing too fast. We need to make reforms to stop it. And for the first time this year, they also said that this is posing risks to our national security, because we risk running short on money to pay for the defense of the country and honor our global commitments, and we're already seeing that happening.
How scary is that? And one of the reasons it's fast growing is because also Medicare, because isn't Medicare one of the fastest growing segments of our federal spending?
Medicare is indeed. One reason is the aging of the population. We now have fewer workers than retirees. We are at a point now where in the 50s you had 16 workers contributing to Social Security and Medicare for every one retiree who received benefits. Today we're down to 3 workers per retiree, and over decades we'll be down to 2. And many people don't even have 2 children anymore, but if they do... Because
they're both working 2 jobs, very busy. We've become a very independent culture that we, both have to, the men and the women in the household both have to work. And this is frightful, because as our population continually ages, we can look at other countries like Japan that has a fast-growing, elder demographic, and that can be scary, because there's not enough money being earned in the economy to generate more income, which suffers taxes. It's kind of a positive feedback loop that things actually get worse and worse, unfortunately, right?
Yes, but there's also some good news, which is that people who were considered old at age 65 and who were retiring, many of them are able to work much longer now, and many of them choose to do so as well because they like the social interactions in the office, or they just want to stay mentally active, which work allows them to do. And even if they don't have the financial need to continue working, many of them choose to do so. And that is actually good for the economy. That is good for tax revenue. And to the extent that they don't have less of a need to rely on government benefits, that's good for the budget as well.
And I think it's a great thing. I tell my clients all the time, you have to retire to something. Either go volunteer or pick up a part-time job, something that you enjoy, something that you don't have to go into work, but you enjoy it because it stimulates the brain. And I think you brought on a good point. It's been a shame because Social Security's brainwashed us to think that at age 65 we shouldn't work anymore, send us out to the pasture. But really, my clients who are in their 60s and 70s have some of the most experience and wisdom they've never had before, and that shouldn't be kept secret. That should be shared with the community. So I'm glad people are working longer and longer. Now, I won't go into it in great depth because we're going to bring Ed from the Heritage Foundation, but what's Obamacare going to have on the effect of federal spending over the next decade?
Yeah, so when Obama came into office, he promised to deal with the entitlement spending crisis, but instead he doubled down on it by creating this new entitlement, Obamacare, and some of the spending is through these exchanges and the subsidies that people receive when they buy insurance on the exchanges, and the other spending increase is from the Medicaid expansion. And those two together come up with nearly $2 trillion in additional spending over the next decade, and that adds up to the debt. And Obamacare actually does increase the deficit in the long run. It increases taxes right away, but in the long run, those taxes won't be sufficient to pay for the increase in spending because of the law. And what it also does is it's hurting the ability of many lower income and middle income individuals to find full-time work. So
Sure.
when they are working part-time so that their employers don't have to provide them with health insurance, which is now mandated, that makes them worse off because they might want to work full-time. Now maybe they have to work 2 part-time jobs, taking more time out of their day to get to their job, and they don't get the kinds of benefits that full-time workers can hope to receive.
Yeah, I think we all love the idea of a utopian society. We all love the idea that everyone has health care, everyone has something to eat, everyone has plenty of money, everyone even has a cell phone. But the reality of that is that comes at a high price. And if we have just a straight economic boom and we were able to just throw money away, that would make sense. But right now we're in the opposite situation. We have federal deficits. We have a large national debt. It doesn't make sense to feel that way because, unfortunately, we can't make a utopian society when we're in debt to our eyeballs, right?
You can do it when you have the money to do it because it sets up such bad incentives that you end up in living in a worse place. Like Margaret Thatcher used to say, eventually you run out of other people's money. If you take their money and spend it and don't allow them to spend it on what they think is important to them and their families, they'll stop working so hard.
So true. So true. Now, what does this mean? Spending continues to escalate. As a retiree, should we be worried about Social Security?
So Social Security is on paper secure until 2030. That's when the trust fund is set to expire. But one thing to keep in mind is that all of the money that is recorded in the trust fund, Congress has already spent. So it represents another debt liability for future generations.
So basically we have an IOU in the jar.
That's right. And if Congress doesn't do anything until 2030 and the trust fund does expire, every beneficiary would see their benefits cut by about 1/4, or about 25%. And that will be sudden and immediate, and it would affect every beneficiary, even the poorest. Now, Congress probably won't allow that to happen. We can't be certain, but I would think there would be a lot of pressure to fix that and make sure that cut doesn't happen. But if we wait until 2030, the changes that will be necessary to prevent that cut or make the cut smaller be much larger than if we made tweaks today. So more people will be affected by the policy changes, and taxes will be higher for future generations, and that will reduce growth, and reduce their opportunities, and that means leaving a bad legacy for younger generations who won't have the same opportunities as today's generation and previous generations had.
And how sad, it's just like a person. Again, we can't be lost in translation, the millions and the trillions. It's just like you and I. If we procrastinate on paying a bill, it only gets worse, because then we have to chase after every little penny to find how we pay this deficit. And the government's no different. If we don't start making the changes now in 2014, 2030 is going to fly by, because there's always issues that come, and there'll be issues for the next 15 years. But if we don't address this issue, it's going to be drastic. Now, what about Medicare? If we have an aging population, are we going to see retirees get reduced benefits? How's that going to affect, and how do we change that?
So Obamacare is trying to cut about $700 billion out of Medicare payments.
Wow.
What that means is that could create access to care issues for seniors, because some of the clinics that rely on Medicare payments now would no longer be able to operate at the reduced payment rates, so they would shut down. That could mean seniors would have to travel further to get care, and they might have faced longer waiting lines. So if those cuts don't go into effect, Medicare will overwhelm the budget in the long run. So what we need are fundamental reforms that introduce more competition in the healthcare marketplace, so the price of healthcare goes down, instead of what the Obamacare is trying to do, which is reduce the cost by reducing access to care with those cuts that are unsustainable. So what's going to happen is that we need to find a way to make sure seniors have access to quality care, but that's affordable. One way of doing this is with premium support, which allows seniors to buy health care with a premium payment provided by the federal government through the exchanges or through a different system set up specifically for seniors. And the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, shows that it would actually save seniors money on their Medicare premiums while saving the taxpayers money. So it's a win-win solution. Unfortunately, there's a very strong lobby that wants to keep the status quo, but I think that a good solution that can help reduce the pressure on the budget and making sure that seniors continue to have quality access to care.
And I want to talk extensively about the solutions. I don't want this to be a doom and gloom show. I want to talk about what potential solutions are on the table that can address some of these issues, because at the end of the day, we have learned to make do. We're a strong country, and so we can find ways to fix these issues. But I do want to make one last point, and if you'll help me, Romina, is talk about not only what this is going to be for my clients, the baby boomers and the greatest generation, what the effects that this federal spending and the deficit is going to be for them, but let's talk about their grandchildren, their children, their legacy. What could we see if this deficit and these debt is not taken into consideration? What could a life like our retirement look like in the next 20, 30, maybe 40 years?
So Medicare and Social Security, as they're currently structured, are unsustainable, but they do provide an important safety net for older Americans who are in need of financial and medical assistance.
Absolutely.
So we should preserve these programs and make sure that they provide that protection against poverty. Now, if we don't do anything and we continue current benefits, we will burden younger generations, the grandchildren of today's baby boomers, and even their children.
When you say burden, you mean more taxes?
Yes, higher taxes, which means less growth, which means less opportunity and less prosperity for them and their families. And if we tax them more, it makes them less able to save for their own needs, and it makes them more dependent on government.
And less motivation, too. Right now I feel like sometimes I work till Wednesday for the government and Thursday, Friday for myself. So, yes, I think the higher taxes, as economics 101, is less money in the economy to grow. The money in the government, it doesn't have the ability to have compound interest. It doesn't have the ability to make capital gains as it would if it was spent into the economy. We have to be really worried, my clients do, and everyone that has a voting ability, that we have to make the right calls when we get into that voting stand, because we're not only talking about ourselves' future, but also our legacy. bureaucracy. And so I think that's very important that we need to keep in mind. So let's talk about some potential solutions. How can we fix it? At the end of the day, either you can fix the income or you can fix the expenses. It's just like our budgets. What are some potential solutions that are on the table or that will be on the table in the future?
So there are some members of Congress that are trying to implement a special commission that finally goes and eliminates poorly functioning and duplicative government programs that really we shouldn't be funding anymore. So a government waste commission that eliminates spending that is unnecessary, that would be a good start, and I think that would show that we can actually do something and make small cuts.
Now, how would that commission be different than the GAO, the Government Accountability Office?
So the GAO puts forth recommendations, but then Congress needs to act on them, and that's where this commission comes in. It forces Congress to act on the GAOs and other organizations' recommendations for programs that no longer work or that never worked and that just waste taxpayer dollars.
So it gives the GAO some teeth.
It helps carry out those recommendations.
Right.
Yes, because right now it stops with the recommendation and then nothing happens.
Got it.
We're trying to fix that. But then looking more broadly, how can we create a better system where Americans control more of their own health care dollars and health care choices and more of their own retirement dollars? And so a system where people save in private retirement accounts and Social Security provides a protection against hardship, so sort of a basic benefit that people are entitled to that keeps them out of poverty. But beyond that, that takes no more than necessary so they can save on their own and get bigger returns from investing in the stock market, for example. So
basically transitioning the responsibility of a government that has bureaucracy back to the people that I believe do have the expertise and the knowledge to make the right decision.
There are many simple ways available now for people to invest. Proposals like the auto IRA make it really easy, where every worker is auto-enrolled and they're going into a target date retirement fund, so they're not faced with confusing choices. If they want to make choices and invest on their own, if they feel capable of doing that and they like, reading about investment options, they can do that. But if they just want to make sure that their money grows and they have a nest egg in retirement, there are systems now that allow them to do that as well. So what's important is choice and giving people the control to prepare for their own retirement.
And that sounds more democratic than having some system do it for you.
Right. And with Medicare, it's similar. Instead of having the provision of care come through the government with the government payment system, which is full of fraud and waste.
Absolutely.
One of the highest improper payment rates come from the healthcare programs, Medicare and Medicaid. There's a lot of fraud because the government is simply not good at managing it, and it doesn't have any interest in saving money like a private business would or an individual.
Sure.
Government, it's always easier to spend other people's money than your own. You're much more careful with your own money. So giving people that ability to buy health insurance through a premium support system so they have quality care on the terms that they desire.
Right, and then they be able to make the calls that they feel is fit. I believe in having the responsibility back in the hands of the people. So a lot of these are great things to think when we're coming up to elections, either local or federal. It's great to think about, where are we at as a country and where do we go from here? It's at the end of the day, it's in the hands of the voters, and if we don't vote, then it's a shame on us because that's our ability to change things. Any other thoughts? Anything that you think our listeners need to know?
I just think it's important to recognize that we are in trouble, but there is a way out. And
Absolutely.
I think there's room for a bipartisan consensus that allows for the economy to grow, that makes sure that people have opportunities, that those most vulnerable among us are taken care of, and that people are enabled to prepare for their own needs, to save for their own needs, and are helped along the way to get there.
Couldn't put it any better. Both. There's no party that has all the answers. That's why it takes bipartisanship to be able to get it done. Romina, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing with us all the insight that you have on the federal deficit and the federal spending.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our interview with the Heritage Foundation. I know I found it very insightful. So if you own an IRA or 401k and you're worried about how the federal spending and the national debt is going to affect your retirement, well, let's take that responsibility into your own hands and let's build an IRA rescue plan. See you next time on What Your Money Would Say.